as I started to go further into my coaching experience and learning experience, I began to wonder more about what makes horses do the things they do. You know, why do they work for us? And I became really disenchanted with the idea of this benevolent theory, we call it, you know, the willing to please idea, that a horse is really that kind of animal that put on the earth just to please us, and they are just willing to please and they're happy to do what we want. And what about the ones that don't do it very well? Are they the bad ones? Are they, is there some kind of malevolent principle happening here? Some horses are just downright bad? Or is it a whole lot to do with our interactions? And as I said, I've come so far in my life with in a full spectrum, in the sense that I too have done so many wrong things, as many people have with horses and continue to do, and life is just a continual process of learning. And so so much of the things I do now is so different to what I used to do, and so many of the things that I've learned lately have been actually through my academic understanding. So I've been very fortunate in being in this country, because I teamed up in a lot of my research with Paul McGreevy here at the University of Sydney at the vet school, and together we've published quite a lot of literature in the journals of veterinary behaviour, particularly about horse behaviour and horse training, and so we've done quite a bit of research. My PhD was in neuroscience. In other words, it's really about the mentality of the horse. It's about the horse's mental processes and their consequences for training, and what does it mean for us as trainers. There's a little bit of important aspects in the beginning that I should take you through. In the beginning, I think we need to just have a look at the safety implications, because I just don't think we're as good at horse training in 2011 as maybe we could be. And therefore what it means is we need to delve deeper into our understanding of how horses learn the things that we propose to teach them. First of all, the death rate in the Western world is about 1 person per million head of population in the Western world, which is really dramatically high. I think the only other form of human-animal interactions that's higher in the death rate is elephant training. And when I work in Asia twice yearly, and when I was down in Kerala in the states in the south of India, one of the statistics there that I found really alarming was that 2 mahouts die in that state every month. And there's only 900 working elephants there, so there's a lot of deaths happening there. And the death rate of elephants is 3 times the mahout rate, so there's a lot of turnover, a lot of replacement of elephants. So there are big problems with elephant training as well. The accident rate is also very high. One can expect a serious accident in every 350 hours of contact time, which is 20 times higher than in motorcycling. So, you know, I told my boys when they were young, no, you're not going to ride a motorcycle on the road, that's for sure, but you can ride horses. So maybe I should have revised that a little bit. Children have the highest injury incidence of all human beings, and that's the most alarming thing. 25% of hospital admissions for sports-related accidents are with horse riding. 25% of all children hospital admissions are with horse-related accidents. That's really quite an alarming rate. Also, children are more likely to suffer head and neck injuries than adults because their necks are smaller and softer, and they also tear around a whole lot more. And finally, horse behaviour is implicated in 61% of all accidents. So we need to do better, and if horse behaviour is implicated in 61% of accidents, we need to start asking questions, have we got it a little bit wrong? The wastage rate in horses is also high. A French study of 3,000 horses that weren't race horses showed that 66.4% of horses that went to the abattoir were there for reasons of bad behaviour. And one of my students, a lady, a vet in Ireland, is just starting a large epidemiological study of a global look at horse wastage, because we really don't know. You see, the horses that pass on, horses are not like dogs with pets where we hang on to them for life. Horses get moved on, mostly, and moved on and moved on. And if they don't suit, if there's something wrong, they've got a temperament problem or whatever you might call it, maybe a training problem, but we call them temperament problems, we just move them on and maybe they end up in the abattoir too. So we need to investigate all of those things. But I'll try not to look on the gloomy side. When we look at the differences between humans and horses in terms of our brain, I've only got this one slide, but it's a really important and a powerful slide, I think. Because one of the things that confronted me many years ago when I first began on this journey and I started doing talks, this was about 20 years ago, I started to talk about the similarities between horses and humans, but then I started to think we probably shouldn't be worried about the similarities. They're going to be obvious because we're going to treat horses as if they are humans. That's our human way. We treat dogs like they're human beings and other animals, so maybe we need to know the differences. And the differences are small but outstanding. The differences are largely in that front part of the brain here. We call the very front part is the prefrontal cortex. Now most animals have a prefrontal cortex, but in humans it is really different. It's identified not so much by its position but more by its cell structure and type. The cells in the human prefrontal cortex are really dense and highly granular, highly nucleated, and therefore they do a lot of work. There's a lot going on in this front part of our brain. It's like a giant picture theatre. It's there where we think about all the problems that face us and we work out solutions. It's all about our consciousness and about our awareness. We take it for granted that we can think ahead easily and we can think back, but what we're doing is we're extracting memories from storage, putting them into our front prefrontal cortex and then visiting them. And then when we think about them, when we then are no longer thinking about them, they go back into storage altered, and that's why our memory is so poor. Human beings are really not good at memory. You know, you only have to work in the law courts to know that there's a lot of disputes and who's right about what we claim to have happened in this particular event. Whereas horses don't make those mistakes. Horses' memory is outstanding. It's a really clear photographic memory. But you see, what price we pay is because we have a videographic memory. We have a memory that we call an episodic memory. It's very good at understanding and replaying the whole episode. We can replay the whole thing out. It's probably not that accurate, but it's not bad. And in doing so, it makes our problems worse. You know, we can be way more psychotic than a horse can because we can, you know, we can have our eyes shut. And if your eyes were shut and I drag you back into the burning plane that you only just managed to escape from, you'd be not happy about it, even though you can't see that you're going into a burning plane because you know where you're going. And that's why, for example, in Monty Roberts' method, when they use a blindfold over the horse's eyes and they lead the horse into the barriers, it can be very successful because the horse doesn't actually know what he is or where he's going, unless, of course, he remembers and has recorded the other physical attributes of going to the trailer or the barriers or whatever. For example, the smell of it or the sound of it. You can also blindfold a horse and lead him through a fire, whereas normally you wouldn't be able to lead him through that fire. What we have in being able to visualize time is looking ahead and looking back, and that enables us to reconstruct our world, and we needed that because, you know, we have an opposable thumb and fingers. And we also started fooling around with fire many eons ago. And in order to do that, we needed to develop a much clearer understanding of the world and future events, particularly in order to build a new world and build houses and build things. We were a pretty hopeless kind of primate, highly vulnerable out on the grasslands, so we needed to pick up a stick and know what we're going to do with it. So that's the most important difference, is this prefrontal cortex. But what it really means is that we have to be very careful when we start thinking about, does the horse know what he just did wrong? Can he recall that back? The answer is probably no, he doesn't. He doesn't actually recall that. So that means that punishment, we've got to be very careful how we think about using punishment in horses. We ought to be very careful how we think of using reward, because it's common, and I used to do it too. You do a great show jumping event or a dressage test and you give the horse a good pat or whatever after the event, but does he know what he just did? Probably not. Because the recall span of the horse is probably only around about 5 seconds. It's really quite short. It may be even a bit shorter than that. But that is his recall in terms of knowing what he has just done. The jury's a little bit out scientifically on that, but that's how it's looking as far as I can see. There's a battery of tests coming where we will know a bit more, but certainly in the meantime we need to be very careful about that. Also, what it means is that because the horse is very context specific in his way of learning stimuli, learning about images, it means that he can't extrapolate because he doesn't have this prefrontal cortex. He can't just extrapolate the same kind of thing and understand a form. You can look at a chair and tell a child that's a chair, and that if you point then to a deck chair, the child might say that's a chair too, because he can imagine you sitting on it or him sitting on it. But horses don't do that, and that's why, you know, if you let a horse go out of the stable, for example, and he runs down the road and he sees a white pony and he's never seen one before, he behaves as if it's a lion. He doesn't say, oh yes, same kind of build, you know, ears, yeah, pretty much a horse. He can't extrapolate. And that's why he's even terrified of his nearest living relative, the donkey. Like, there's no reason to be scared of a donkey, but they are. And things that are even more bizarre, like emus, well, that's a whole new ball game. Okay, so it's important to remember that this context-specific aspect of horse behaviour is also very useful for trainers, because when you start teaching a horse something, you have to remember he learned that in that place, and after those first few repetitions in that place, he will probably only do it in that place. You first do your first piaffe or whatever. He will only do it in that place, most likely, or he'll do it best in that place. The response begins to wane as we take him to other places. So what we should do as trainers is take him slightly away from that place to do the next few repetitions until he's really fluent at that, and then take him a little further away again, and further away. So with the young horse, it's more ideal to train him whereby you might take him from, you know, your yards to a bigger arena, but it looks a bit similar on the same place, and then to something slightly different, and then maybe to a show, but where it's very low key and is just in hand, or another person's place that's similar. Just make the steps small all the way through before you decide to just take him as a raw breaker straight out of the yard into the dressage arena, because, as you know, it doesn't work very well. So it's worth thinking about those step-by-step aspects. For all intents and purposes, other aspects of the horse's brain are very similar to ours. Looking at ethology, ethology is the study of natural behaviours in animals. In other words, the hardwired behaviours, the wiring that's already there. And there's a substantial amount in mammals of behaviour that's already there. For example, if you show a rhesus monkey that's been in a cage and his ancestors have been too for 5 generations, and you show him a snake, he'll immediately go to the top of the cage, knowing that the snake, he's going to be safe from the snake at the top of the cage. If you make the sound of an eagle, of a harpy eagle, the monkey will go straight down to the bottom of the cage because he's hardwired to give a certain reaction from that noise. Now, the same kinds of things are found in horses. Certain things are hardwired. It means that they don't have to learn them, so it makes their navigation around the world as a foal way safer and easier. But there's some aspects that I think deserve special mention that are relevant to training, and one is social organisation, because we've really got that wrong. Academics throughout the world agree with me, and this is actually not my work, it's their work, because I'm not so much of an ethologist. My area is in neuroscience. But all the studies of wild horses in England, the New Forest pony, the Kamanoa horse in New Zealand, Brumbies in Australia, horses in Assateague Island in the States, everywhere, the results are pretty much the same. There is no single horse that's dominant for all resources. Horses are not, you can't just label a horse as a completely dominant horse, because in nature there's never been a horse that's ever been a winner in all its interactions more than 70% of the time, which isn't a lot, because that means 30% of the time he's losing. And they're showing the same kinds of results with wolves as well, that there is no wolf that's just the supreme master. You see, it kind of suits us as humans to put the same model of human behaviour onto animals and say, yeah, it's just like the army. You've got a general, and all of these positions are maintained by ritualised aggression, but it doesn't happen with animals. It's a much more fluid social mobility than it is in the more structured human societies, you know, the church, the army, whatever, schooling, businesses on the old-fashioned model. So we need to be careful about that. So horses will be dominant for one thing, but maybe not for the other. And when they've had enough, then they'll allow others to move through as well, and they will be pushed out of the road. It's all to do with their appetite and their desire for certain resources. And in terms of leadership too, there is no such thing as leaders in the wild. It doesn't actually happen. The reality of all the studies show is that the first horse to get up and move to the waterhole is just as likely and most likely to be a pregnant mare. If she's lactating, of course she's going to need more water. Or it could be a foal. So we just have to be careful, because there are certainly some aspects of the hierarchy, but it's really quite fragile and loose and highly mobile in horses, that it's unsafe to say that this is an alpha mare and that's why it's so difficult. It's probably other reasons. And these reasons are going to be much more about its interaction with us. What I'm going to lead you into is understanding about how negative reinforcement works, because that's the big key. I used to go around the world in the early days talking about negative reinforcement, and even in zoo conferences and even animal behaviour conferences, I'd get some very bad comments saying negative reinforcement's a really bad thing because it's got the word negative in front of it. I think it should be renamed as removal reinforcement, because negative reinforcement was coined in the mathematical connotation, meaning when you remove an aversive pressure from an animal, that reinforces a behaviour that happens at the same time. So if you squeeze the animal and push it in the neck and it lifts its leg up, very soon when you push it in the neck it thinks that the answer to the question is just to lift its leg up. Every horse has a profile of negative reinforcement, and that's what I want you to think about before I even get to that part, because it's really interesting. This is how I see the world in animals. This idea of negative reinforcement is important and intrinsic to the way we train all ridden animals, elephants, horses, camels, the way dogs are led. It's all involving negative reinforcement. It's the release of the pressure. You pull on the lead rein, the dog goes forward, the lead rein softens, and it should. And in doing that, you could see that every animal could have a profile of all of its history in negative reinforcement. So for example, the first time you touch a foal, did he gallop off? If he did, his first major lesson in negative reinforcement was when humans touch you, the way you get to remove the pressure is to run away. All horses are different, so we need to understand that, and we need to recognise that we have to tailor our training according to it and set things up well. But negative reinforcement underpins what we do, because it's about how our reins work and how our legs work. We can enhance our training with positive reinforcement too, but even the lightest rein aid and the lightest leg aid is an example of negative reinforcement. So you can imagine we get this horse to lead forward, this foal, and the first thing it does when it feels the pressure, because we haven't set it up properly, is it leaps up in the end, shoots backwards, and we release the pressure. And then we think, this is a difficult one, he's going to be a real rat bag. And the horse is thinking, oh, this is the way you remove the pressure. Just run backwards and do the opposite to the pressure. So it's the first lesson in the wrong direction. So these are substantial lessons. It's like the bottom of a pyramid. And so after that, he trials the same recipe. If you feel pressure, do something the opposite. So you see, if we set our horses up to give the right answers, we would do so much better. There are so many good trainers around in the world. I just watched Tracy Westfall this morning, and I was so impressed because she explains that so well, and the way she uses her pressures and doing things really simply. And she's not the only one. I've seen Steve Jeffries and people like that, Steve Brady, so many examples of good training. The Pirelli system, they understand how pressure is removed. I'm the scientific messenger in a way to explain, well, this is how it works. And to my mind, if we used a little bit of this understanding, we would actually understand how all these systems work, and we wouldn't need to use sort of fluffy language to explain it. So that's where I'm heading. Now, also the fear and flight response is also a very important one to understand. There's this horrid little gland at the base of the horse's brain called the amygdala that actually is the floodgates for the flight response. It's a modulator. Every information that comes into the horse's senses goes through the amygdala and says whether it's a good idea, whether it should be stored as a fear response or not. if we understand how bad things can be for the horse, because it has the largest amygdala of all domestic animals. It's really wired for fear. And it's also interesting to me that the amygdala has the strongest neural projections to the jaw, which is why there are so many oral conflicts in horses, why he shows his fear so much in teeth grinding, tongue lolling, gnashing of the teeth, movements of the jaw. They're really important for us to understand that this is quite a good gateway for judges too to recognise when there are stresses on the horse. This is an example of something to do with that shows the kinds of things that can go horribly wrong. This is a habituation exercise gone horribly wrong, where the horse now starts going and it just doesn't stop. And once the horse starts doing this, even when the stress is gone, you can see he can be so far when it gets to about 8 out of 10 that he just doesn't stop. And luckily there was some element of a stop button in there that saved this guy's life, or at least saved his neck. Stop is a very important thing. And one thing that I think is a problem is that we tend to ignore the stop, more so in dressage than ever before, and it's crazy. I was again really happy to hear Tracy Westfall, but all the others say it too in the new age training styles. They say, teach the horse backwards, but not in dressage. Oh no, be really scared of that. They said, but what if he goes backwards all by himself? Well, if you teach him clearly, he won't. No one ever says, don't teach a dog to sit, because what if he sits all by himself? Or what if the horse does piaffe all by himself? That would be really bad. If you have a good go button and a good stop button, there's no danger in that, and that's the aim, is having really clear signals. Now I want to zero in to look at learning, just to explain to you, there's really only these 4 aspects of learning I need to focus on, and even the second one, sensitisation, where we sensitise an animal to stimuli, is not as important as the others, so I'm going to ignore it a little bit, but it's just about sensitising horses to certain stimuli. Habituation, however, is very important. That one is what we call desensitisation. And then our training through negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement comes under the banner of operant conditioning. And they're teaching the horse the light aid, the voice command, any signal, any cue that's fairly benign is about classical conditioning. Pavlovian conditioning, it's also known as. I'll explain that. This is a little bit of work I did in the Belgian police force just 4 weeks ago. And it's a very big police force there, 150 police horses right in the centre of Brussels. And I did a 5-day clinic there. Oh, that's a very short video too. But I did a 5-day clinic there and just went through in the beginning about learning processes, learning principles, habituation techniques, and dealing with conflict behaviours, because there are so many challenges. The Belgian police have the biggest challenges in the world, and so I was really pleased to be associated with it, because they have the EU headquarters there and the possibility for major terrorism, and also NATO. So they do all sorts of things. That cement mixer there, by the way, is full of rocks. We did this with the Victorian police too, which is important to habituate horses to noise. They also habituate them to smoke, to fire, to drums, to sounds, to trams, to all sorts of things. If any of you are interested in some of this work, if you look up hippo.tv, you'll see some work I did with the Belgian police in a 1-day clinic in May with a horse that was a biter called Crassus. He's been famous because he'd been biting for 8 years, and all I had to do was teach him to stop and step back. And that really is the essence of, if a horse is aggressive, or an elephant, I do the same thing with the elephants, if an animal's aggressive, teach it to step back. Why is it so simple? Because the wiring of the brain for aggression is wired in with going forwards. Animals that are retreating are not aggressive. So aggressive animals are always trying to rush forward, and they tend to often step forward when they're biting and attacking. Therefore, they don't stop well. They tend to lean on the rein. Teach them to step back and give. Pressure, give, and they soon learn not to do it. I'll go into that a little bit later. Now, just looking at habituation techniques, habituation is where animals learn not to react to fearful stimuli. It's actually about learning not to react to stimuli, but for our purposes, it's fearful stimuli. It's worthwhile thinking about what rewards fear, because people will give you so many complicated answers why horses react to fearful stimuli. But there's only two reasons. One is that their legs go fast, and two is that the legs go far. That's all. That's all there is to it. It just rewards it. So when someone says, "Oh, my horse is really scared of watering cans," all I think is, well, you must have let his legs go fast and far. Because it's really about distance, you see. If the animal shies this far and this fast, he'll probably do it again. But if he shies this fast and this far, he'll definitely do it again. There's something about increasing distance that makes the animal learn that fear response. So that's what we've got to do, is have better controls with our aids. That's why in the old German text they always talk about horses that shy and do things like that are just not on the aids. We need to make our aids deeper, and we can do that with, just for example, and this is what I'm going to be showing you tomorrow in the demonstration, but if we do things, for example, with our reins, don't worry about the seat because that's classical conditioning. Worry about it when the reins are perfect. Get the reins working well for stop, and do things like not only walk halt so that he can do it in just 2 steps, and on the third moment you release, and even trot halt, so you can go trot halt give. And if you can do trot halt give and you do about a dozen of those, you will definitely find your stop button better just in a dozen of those. So there's 2 minutes work for making your mouth better. Because you see, what people always talk about, and this is what I was alluding to earlier, is that the bit is just there for contact. So that's kind of like handlebars. That's not what it is there for, because everyone knows that when a breaker breaks in a horse, he teaches the horse to stop from the reins, and even though not everyone knows what they're doing, they're darn good at it. And they give when the horse stops. So they go whoop, give, and they learn all these things. These are the horse's ABCs, as Kira Kirkland calls them. I want to just show you these 6 techniques of desensitisation. I'll run through them quickly. This picture is some work I did with a Danish police getting a horse used to capsicum spray, which was somewhat disconcerting for me in the beginning because I don't speak Danish, and I thought I was dealing with real capsicum spray, but I wasn't. Interestingly, horses do not react to tear gas and capsicum spray like people do. They have a mild, almost no reaction to tear gas or capsicum, pepper spray, whereas dogs and humans do. Okay, just looking at the first technique. This is an old video, but before I show you, general habituation is just where the animal gradually gets used to things. And the trouble is, he's free to escape. He practices escape behaviour, and the fear reaction, once he's learned fear, you can't undo it. That's what the amygdala does. That's its problem, is that once he learns fear, he can't unlearn that fear reaction. You can suppress it, and he probably won't show it anymore, but given the slightest provocation, that fear response in a full-blown way can come flooding back. That's the problem with fear, so we're best avoiding it. And this, just as an experiment from Holland, as I said, it's not a good video, but it just shows, here comes an umbrella, and the foal runs around, and he's running around. You see, the fact that he's showing fast legs and distance a little bit, he runs to the corner, he will get used to that umbrella, but that incidence there will be planted in his head as a really distinct memory laid down of fear reaction. So there are other methods that are better than just general habituation. In the wild, this is generally the method that they use, is general habituation, and of course it's important that he doesn't forget his fear. If he runs away from something in the wild, it's probably worth running away from. The next one is response prevention, and here all this is about is if you hold the horse still because you stop his legs from moving and you stop him from making distance, he will soon learn not to give the fear reaction. The trouble is he could be flooded because it could be just too much fearful stimulus. And this is actually part of a long demonstration that my son Warwick did for a veterinary conference. And we had to do an indoor arena, so it involved some flooding, and that's why I show you. He tries to keep the horse still, and he puts the clippers on the horse's neck, and the horse is having none of it. I hope the people in the audience stay still. And then he touches the horse on the neck. You know, in breaking in, when you bag a horse down and you sack him down and you wave things over him, you try and keep it still. That's an example of response prevention. Ideally, you do it in a really minimal way so that there is very little flooding going on. Systematic desensitisation is where you gradually get the animal used to things so that there is no reaction. So it's just a gradual introduction, and this is some work I did with the Victorian Police Force, where we got the horses used to this blow-up clown at a certain distance. This is actually the Victorian and the West Australian Police. We did a clinic combining the two, and then they brought the horses forward because we'd already done a whole lot of systematic work closer and closer. So now the horses are generally habituated to it. So we teach the horses, we teach all our horses to stand still. We call that park, whereby you teach them to stand and then you're able to move away, because park is a great technique because it means that the horse's legs won't be moving. And if he moves forward or sideways, you just say back and you get him to go back one step. Even if his hind legs go sideways, you just put him back. So all these horses had already had one lesson in park. And so in the end we had them all just standing there around that clown. It's quite a good idea to use even a dressage whip and just teach the horse that when you, I mean, you should only ever use the whip to the extent that you can take it on your own leg too. It's really just to annoy him, and you tap him on the cannon bone of the leg that's most in front, and you tap him until the leg goes back, and then of course you stop tapping immediately. Then you might tap the other one and stop. Or just do one step at a time first, because he learns it. If you tap two, well, he's already done one right answer. Why wasn't it rewarded, you see? So you teach him to step back and stay back, and the advantage of this is that when you're standing at a distance, if he moves forward, you can say, no, back, and without moving your legs, because you don't want that to be the signal, you can say back and give him a little touch on the leg. Another one is approach conditioning. Now, this is really interesting. It's basically just that if you chase things, the horse becomes less fearful. If your horse is scared of seagulls on the beach, chase them. If he's scared of cattle, chase them. Cow horses are generally not scared of cows because they chase them. And so it's really worthwhile thinking about that. And there's good techniques you can do. We do this with the police, but with other horses and kids too, whereby we teach them to just chase a ball. This is the first example. This horse, that probably was way too much. This was a work experience girl I had with me, and I was busy wanting to film before I went to Europe last May, and I said to her, would you just mind rolling the ball a little bit towards the horse? And I didn't mean quite that much, but at any rate. But you watch this horse, it's really interesting. Once he moves it with his feet, it's a little Arab, and little Arabian horse, and he's saying, no, I don't want to touch it, I don't want to touch it. And Rowan, this guy who works with us, is getting him to touch it with his feet and maybe making... You watch the look on the horse's face when he finally does, he's quite stunned. Come on, just touch it. You can do it. Don't be scared. Almost piaffe. There you go. Oh my goodness. And he's much more likely that... Oh, good heavens. Now he's onto it. And he said that was his first experience with his ball, so it was pretty interesting. I'll move on because you can see he just gets braver and braver about touching this ball after that. Once you start doing this, the horse starts to become a bit more generalised, especially if you use different coloured balls or the ball in different places. It can start to generalise into his life, and it's a really worthwhile thing to do. One of the things we did in Melbourne with the police horses down there is we chased trams in Sturt Street for the horses that are scared of trams, and that's a good street because it's quite quiet generally. And the way it works best, we did the same in Belgium with a horse that was scared of a bobcat. I have to, here at least I can say the word bobcat. In Ireland, when I did this talk a few weeks ago, they're thinking, well, what's so scary about a bobcat? Because they're thinking like a small cat. But you know what I mean by a bobcat. So what we do is the bobcat's parked there. We get him used to the bobcat by just doing some groundwork through overshadowing. I'll show you that in a minute. But then we move the bobcat, and then the horse runs after the bobcat and then stops, and then the bobcat gets further away. Then we chase it again, and it makes them quite brave, and they soon get to sniff it. We don't actually sniff trams because it's way too close, but you can do this with most things. This is an example of some more work in Belgium with, oh, I thought this was some approach conditioning, but it's not. But at any rate, I think there are some horses that are going to trot up after that. And this is just one thing that we do with the police there, is drag a drum full of rocks behind the horses. Oh, now there he is, he's stopping. And then he's going to say, now trot. This was a really fearful horse that was scared of most things. I had 3 problem horses at this clinic that really had big problems. You can see he tosses his head, he's really quite frustrated about things at this point, but he's getting better and better. So we do a lot of this chasing, only to the point where he can handle it, and then say, now stop. And it's a good idea to make him stop before he wants to stop, so that it's not his idea to stop, you see. We also chase that giant ball there. Stimulus blending is really just when you blend one stimulus that he's already okay with, like the hose, with something that he is scared of, like an aerosol, for example. So these are just tools that you can use. You know, you can imagine perhaps where you can extrapolate this into your own environment for your other problems. But the horse that's scared of aerosols, if you squirt the horse with the hose and squirt him with the aerosol at the same time, the sound bite of the hose blends in with the sound bite of the aerosol, so that sound is kind of dull. The sound bite's different. And also the feel of it on his skin is a different feel bite, if you can call it that, because it's not on dry hair anymore, it's on wet skin. So those two things make the horse much less fearful, because his fear reaction to the aerosol is totally context specific. In other words, it's just about that sound and that feeling. So if you change the sound and change the feeling, you can fix the problem. So it's a very effective method. So this is an example of how this works. So here we are, we're going to hose the horse, and this horse actually wasn't needing this. I just needed some film footage of it before I went away to Europe in May. So just to show how the process works, but we're going to spray him with some Aerogard in a minute. The horse is not mad keen on it because it's still winter. And so he stops hosing, then he hoses him again. And then Elsa comes along with the aerosol. So it's really as simple as that. And then you start spraying all over his wet skin, he doesn't mind, and then we start spraying on dry skin. I've had a lot of success with that for horses that are afraid of aerosols. And the capsicum spray horse as well, we did a lot of work with blending. This is some work I did in Belfast 3 weeks ago with a horse that was head shy. Now this is for a head shy horse, because it's very context specific, he's afraid of human fingers touching his head because he's moved his head away and removed the hands. Negative reinforcement all over again. I wet the towel, and when you have a wet towel and you rub the horse over the head, it's a novel stimulus, so the horse doesn't usually mind that, or half the time they like it because they've already been wiped with a wet towel. So then you can start slipping your hand underneath it. You could see the 2 disbelieving owners standing beside me with their hands on their hips, but they were right into it in the end when they could see that I could actually handle his ears for the first time. Finally, overshadowing. Now this is the most interesting, I think. It's the most useful, and I'd really like you to take this one home. I first read this when I had to read a textbook by a guy by the name of Hull. When I was doing my PhD, my supervisor said, you really ought to read Hull. And I said, okay, that'd be good. And then I discovered what Hull was in the library, just a big textbook, mostly maths, equations, and I was thinking, this is pretty much the driest thing I've ever seen. But overshadowing is one of these little gems that shone out. And Pavlov first identified overshadowing in 1927, but Hull defined it much better later. And he basically said when an animal is exposed to 2 or more intense stimuli, only one will take precedence in terms of his reaction to it. Because animals, like humans, can only divert their attentional mechanism, probably not women, I think they're better at that, but other animals and men, we can just do this one thing at one time, and our attentional mechanisms are diverted only to that thing. So that means that, you see, if the horse is scared of clippers and you bring the clippers, if you're interested in an example of this, you can read the Euro Dressage site, the work I did with the Global Dressage Forum last week, where I overshadowed a horse to clippers and another one to a broom that was scared of brooms, would you believe? But just through overshadowing, and there's quite a write-up in the Euro dressage site about that now, but it's quite an easy thing to do. Basically, if you teach the horse to step back and step forward from light pressure, I'm getting the nod, and you get forward and back from light pressure, and then you introduce the clippers. When you introduce them, the horse will suddenly be heavy going forward and back. And so you keep the clippers at that position, like in a systematic desensitisation way, keep the clippers at the same distance, and you make him go forward and back. More pressure, make him go back. And so he goes, oh, all right, I'll go back, forward. And when he gets light again, bring them closer. Again, he'll be heavy, make him light. Bring them closer. Again, he'll be heavy, make him light. And it works in about 3 sessions of 10 to 15 minutes. You can have a horse habituated to the clippers. So stepping backwards is really valuable. I'll just have to mention negative reinforcement. And negative reinforcement is about removing an aversive stimulus when an animal gives the right response. So immediately when they give the correct behaviour, you remove the pressure. That's the timing. All these demos you see here will be, when it's good, will be because they removed the pressure at the right time. If it's bad, it could be because they didn't. And one of my biggest bugbears is that whilst in many New Age training circles they remove the pressure very well, in dressage it's not well known. And this is crazy to me that this is an Olympic sport and people do not remove the pressure or know about it much. So you could be a really high-level Grand Prix rider, but you still haven't got the tools to load a difficult horse into a horse trailer. But if you understood how negative reinforcement works, you could do that. And I think it's critical because it's all about horse welfare. We also call this pressure release. And if we use intermittent pressure like a whip tap, we should use it in this systematic format whereby the pressure, the rhythm doesn't change, or if anything, it escalates. If we go tap, 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 but not to let it diminish or have gaps in the rhythm, because the gap could be the removal of the aversive stimulus. What we need to remember is when we use negative reinforcement to not change the rules. Now, just remember, when the horse was broken in, he learned that fundamentally the reins control his deceleration. They're the fundamental decelerators. That the horse comes down the gate, slows within the gate, shortens within the gate, and also reverses and turns. They're from the reins. And he also learns from the rider's leg pressures that he goes up the gate, he quickens and he lengthens and he goes sideways. We have to remember that these should never be divorced. That if you want to make the horse rounder with your reins, it's okay, but don't divorce slowing. Maybe make him rounder as you slow. Because if you make him rounder, some horses, yeah, you'll get away with it. But some horses, and the very sensitive ones, which may be the best, are the ones that when you make him round without slowing him, so now A, B and C don't mean A, B and C anymore, that's when he starts to have a problem and shows conflict behaviour, and we might just see it as naughty behaviour. You should know that, you idiot. But no, it's more likely that he's just confused. So it's worth thinking about that and maintaining all of these basics. Positive reinforcement is about giving the horse something attractive immediately on the correct response. Sometimes people use target training, like this is an example of a horse being target trained, whereby they use a target, and as soon as the horse touches it with his nose, you click and give him food. If you want to know more about target training, feel free to visit Georgia Bruce's stand, because she's really the expert, the best practitioner of positive reinforcement in this country with horses, for sure. It's about adding something attractive immediately when the animal gives the right response. But we can also use wither caressing. If you scratch the horse at the base of the wither, it's the only animal in the world whereby scratching there lowers the heart rate. So it's pretty interesting. So if you say the word good boy when the horse gives the right reaction exactly at that moment, because the timing's so critical, and you say good boy and then immediately give him a scratch, then he will soon learn to repeat it. So the best format of this in terms of enhancing your training with positive reinforcement is to teach him through correct negative reinforcement first. So you teach him to squeeze, go forward, release, and then switch over to use positive reinforcement. And you'll find the responses will last longer. And as I said, you can use clicker training, or you can just say good boy and give him a scratch. But it's really worth doing, because Horse training is interesting to me that it thrives solely on negative reinforcement, and it's okay, it works, but you can do better. And the last learning process is classical conditioning. And classical conditioning is all about anticipation. Pavlov noticed, he was actually a physiologist, and he noticed when he was doing experiments on salivation in the dog, and he was getting meat prepared for the dog to eat, or meat powder prepared for the dog to eat to make it salivate, he noticed the dog was starting to salivate before he even opened the cupboard door. Like when he'd opened the laboratory door, the dog was already drooling. And he started to think, this is a kind of weird learning process that is yet undescribed. And it's Pavlovian conditioning. And what it means to us as trainers is if we want to teach a horse a voice command or a light aid, it must come first. And I think many of the trainers here are good at explaining that, and explaining that, you know, when you want to teach the horse to move forward and with a voice command, walk on or whatever, just say walk on first. Walk on, then the pressure. If you say walk on at the same time as the pressure, he will learn it, but it's many times slower. If you say walk on after you do the pressure, he will not learn it at all. So it's made purely to be at the front. And we do the same thing with the elephants. We give them a voice command followed by the light pressure, followed by the stick tap if he doesn't go forward, and when he goes forward, then the good boy, and then we give him the food. So it follows this kind of train like that. So it's always worth remembering that that's where it should be. But I just want to explain why this is so important, this pressure release, because you see, there are all these methods around. Now, many people who do these various head carriages, whether it's the high frame, the low frame, or the horrible frame, either all of them, if they have strong mouth pressure, are just as bad as each other, to be perfectly honest. They all can produce learned helplessness. You see, because animals in general learn these light aids, learn these signals as a way of predicting responses so they can give the answer. That's what the light aid is always about. And when they're confused, they start to show active coping mechanisms, bucking, rearing, shying, leaping. Their heart rate goes up, their blood pressure goes up. It's quite similar to cutaneous pain. When these mechanisms don't work, the stressor doesn't leave them, the rider doesn't come off, the horse gets punished for bucking, and if it's a case of his confusion that's causing it, the next thing he can do is start developing a tolerance, which is a passive coping mechanism whereby his heart rate goes down, his blood pressure goes down. It's more similar to deep visceral pain, and that's the horse that's heading down the slippery slope towards learned helplessness, which is not something you can directly define or observe. You can't say that animal's got learned helplessness unless it was completely dead, dull, and doesn't move at all from any aid. But if it still moves, but it's looking like it's dull and it's got spur marks so it can tolerate pain that it would never have tolerated in breaking in stage, then you could say it's somewhere down that track of learned helplessness. And that's what we've got to avoid. So for me, it's so much about lightness and self-carriage and reintroducing self-carriage back into all our horse sports, particularly dressage, because it's now heading down the slope where it's the worst at it. It's untenable to me to think that you should have X kilos in your hand when you ride. It's got to be just the weight of the reins. That's the real communication between the horse and the rider. So for the horse, learned helplessness develops when pain is or even any kind of pressure is unpredictable, uncontrollable from his point of view, and inescapable. The question is, if the horse is coming out of learned helplessness, like you're retraining him, you're making his life much clearer, does he show some active coping mechanisms? I think they do, but there's no literature on horses that have ever emerged from it, because generally when animals have fully blown learned helplessness, see the studies done on this were with rats using electric shocks, or dogs actually, using electric shocks, and then later with rats. And that was such a full-blown learned helplessness, they never came out of it. They were completely unused and some of them died. So it's a fatal kind of disease. But probably in the early stages of those confusions and passive coping mechanisms, I think that it's kind of a good thing that they do maybe show some active mechanisms. But our job is to make sure we don't confuse animals so they make these active mechanisms. See, if we train horses to be really clear about our work in hand, the signals for go and stop in hand and standing still, and don't let them get controlled by the environment where, it's a pussycat walking along the wall that made him suddenly shy 50 metres. and under saddle we teach him to go very clearly from the leg and rein aids, then you'll find that the horse won't be showing these active coping mechanisms. He's got no reason to. So all of these things that he does, he's not consciously trying to tell us, I don't believe that we're doing something wrong. It's just a natural defence mechanism that comes up that is our sign that we're doing something wrong. I'll finish on that because there's no more information on the learning, and I wanted to perhaps take some questions. Because you see, what our job is to do is to control the biomechanics of the horse, the stop, the go, the turns, through learning, through identifying how the horse moves his legs and how we are to reinforce that behaviour. For those of you who are interested, my booth is 320. If you want to come and ask questions, I have books, DVDs, videos of all of our work and a systematic training book. Thank you.